Hello, happy December. It's Financial Freedom Fridays with Gus Tucker. How you guys doing? Hey, get the word out. Share this broadcast with folks. We're entering into a special time, a thought-provoking time to talk about creating pathways to financial independence for Black Americans. Okay, it's about creating an economic environment to empower Black Americans and African Americans to thrive. Black Americans, African Americans. What's the difference? Well, Black Americans are people whose heritage really is here in America, who don't have a home back in Africa to call their own, or people that they're connected to that they can call out right now today. But we have to work together because as long as we're here in America, we're in the same boat, if you will. So how do we create an environment to do this? So why this podcast? What's the motive? To support as many Black Americans and African Americans in applying the practical tools and understanding to gain financial independence and sustain it for multiple generations. So this means, are you against other people, Gus? Are you a racist? In that sense of the word? No. One can't be a racist because I don't have I'm not a part of the overclass where I've got the numbers of people to be able to do that systematically. And I'm not on a personal level, and I'm for everybody. But I happen to be a Black American, and when you see me, that becomes readily apparent. And when that becomes readily apparent, certain things become true in how people treat me and treat you based on the culture we're in. And that's just the reality of it. I mean, it's just what it is. So given that reality, there's certain things we need to do and bring to bear on our situation to create this thing called financial independence. Because to create financial independence, we need to have an economic system that's going to support us in doing that. I don't know about you, but until very recently, I never felt really secure in who I was or my opportunities for the future, because it was always like somebody else had the keys to my kingdom. And then until really understanding that financial independence, it's a mindset, and it's a mindset based on principles that you must internalize in your own life that are true. And my principles come from the Bible, and it's interesting, even that nomenclature, that the Bible is somehow a quote unquote white man's religion or something like that. I just want to put this on your mind real quick. Bing. Where are the Tigris and Euphrates rivers? Where is the Nile? Where's the seat of where the Bible started at in Genesis? It's in Africa. Quiet as it's kept, everybody on this planet gets their roots from Africa. Just let that sink in for a minute. We may not want to sit with that or recognize that as a reality, but that's the truth. That's the truth. And the most advanced societies in our world started in Egypt. Egypt is in Africa. The pyramids that were built, and people still wonder, how did they do that? They were built by Egyptians who are African. So financial independence needs to happen in the context of a society, of an economy that will allow you access to the tools that you need to make that financial independence happen. And we as Black Americans have some unique challenges and opportunities to make that happen. We need to recognize that and just deal with it and make it happen. There are obstacles, but there's nothing that can stop us from doing what it is that we believe God wants us to do. So what's financial independence? How can it be developed by Black people for Black people? So we need a strategy as a whole to change our economic position and political power in America. Right now, we're in the midst of election season, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But we need to change our economic position and political power in America. We're going to study some writing ideas of a guy named Claude Anderson. I'm not saying he's right or wrong, but he's taken the time to put these books together that we're going to review And what I'm asking is that you read them to challenge your thinking and come up with your own perspective. But let's do the work together to come up with a perspective that we can draw together as a group and come up with a unified direction as a people. And we've got to work together as a group. We're not going to make it. Yeah, people make it one off. And there are all kind of people that are successful in a one-off setting, but to really change it for people in total, we've got to do this as a group. And those who have made it, the challenge to you is to reach back and pull somebody with you and empower them to get where you're at. We got to demand what we want from the powers that be together. We'll talk about that in a bit. So leadership is critical. We need leadership that can lead us into economic justice, wealth, and power. We're in a competitive society, guys. And there's nothing to help people that are unorganized and inarticulate. If you're not organized and you can't articulate what you want, you're going to get left in the dust. So we as a group need to be organized and articulate what it is that we want from the powers that be so we can get it. Civil rights movement. It's great. But the question is, did integration help or hurt us? Did wealth get redistributed as a result of the civil rights movement? Yes or no? Do we have clear direction? And are there a succession of leaders to lead our folks? The civil rights movement did a lot of great stuff, but these are 4 areas we continue to need to work on, okay, to really create the future that we want for ourselves. Hey, I want you to think about this, and we're going to talk about this a little more today. Black people built America. The White House was built by Black people. The White House was built by Black people. The White House was built by Black people. And we built much of the infrastructure in America. Although Black people have contributed so much to this country, they've often been systematically barred from experience its benefit, except for a few chosen few, which are often selected by those with power. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as we come up to this section. And we're going to handle that this week and next week. It may take a couple weeks, but I want you to think about these questions that are posed in this book. This is a book written by Dr. Claude Anderson. It's called A Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. And we're going to deal in chapter 10 today, which is about Black economic empowerment. I'm going to read right to you some of the things that he's talking about and to begin to posit some questions. And let's have some discussion about it. Put some comments in the chat. If we can't, we'll deal with them this week. We'll deal with them next week. We'll deal with them in responses to you. But we need to have a conversation about this. And there's some questions that should be asked. Questions. We just had midterm elections, right? Are you a red state and a blue state? Are you red or blue? You know, should we align ourselves with liberals or conservatives? So here's a question. I want you to listen to this. In truth, it makes little difference with which ideological group Blacks identify because there's a scant difference between liberals and conservatives. Neither is willing to drastically alter the socioeconomic structure to benefit Black Americans. Think about this now. We've had Republicans and Democrats for a couple hundred years. And Blacks have aligned themselves with either party at one time, both parties. How has it changed our situation? Quiet as it's kept. Back in the day, it was the Republicans that were pushing for Black votes. Now we seem to think it's the Democrats. Man, who consequently, if Blacks choose either side, they would still wind up in the same spot, at the bottom of the ranking order of acceptability. Powerless and impoverished. Conservative racial tactics are open. Now, this is Dr. Anderson. I'm reading this to you and I'm asking for what are your thoughts? Conservative racial tactics are open, direct, and demonstrate their determination to conserve white privileges, political advantages, and nearly 100% ownership of all wealth and resources. There was a TV show called the Griot Awards. I encourage you to go watch this show. You can watch it online. You go to thegrio.com, TheGrio.com, thegrio.com. Byron Allen, who's pretty much a billionaire by now, bought the Griot as a media outlet. And he did an award show. And one of the people that he gave an award to is a guy named Don Peoples. And he's a real estate developer. And right now in New York, you can Google this. It's called the Affirmation Tower. The Affirmation Tower. It's a 2 million square foot building. The architect's black. All the construction people are black. The developer is black. And the tenants will be black. And all the tenants, except for the NAACP that'll be in there, are all black entrepreneurs. And it's called the Affirmation Tower to affirm the role of black people in our economy. Don Peoples, in his address during the Griot Awards, made the following statement. He talked about venture capital, the money that's available to help companies to grow. And most companies grow because somebody believes in them and they're willing to invest in them so they can hire people, run advertising, develop new products, and grow their company. And when they grow their company, that creates jobs for people, but it also creates wealth for the investors. He said $83 trillion is available for venture capital. Black Americans are 13 to 14% of the population. Okay? If you throw in other people of color and women, that's over half the population. Well, that whole group of people, half the population, guess what percentage of that $83 trillion are invested in companies that they found and lead? 1.5%. That means $1.3 trillion out of $83 trillion goes to over 50% of the population. And white men that represent 30% of the population have the other 87.7%. So let me ask you a question. How can you have economic empowerment when you're playing with 1% of the chips? And that's as a result of what both Republicans and Democrats have done. Neither one of them has fixed this. As I read, conservative racial tactics are open, direct, and demonstrate their determination to conserve white privileges, political advantages, and nearly 100% ownership of all wealth and resources. I just talked about 88% of venture capital being controlled and in the hands of white men. Conservatives do not intend to share the unearned prosperity that their ancestors gained by migrating to America, prosperity that came from black enslavement and Jim Crow segregation. Conservatives are very well aware of the purpose of that racial norms in the Diversity Acts of the 1700s. Read that. That whites would be the dominant and controlling population. Conservatives do not believe in sharing or surrendering power or resources. Conservatism comes from the root word to conserve, which means to hold on to what one has. When Black Americans have never had more than 0.5% of anything of value in the richest nation on the earth. In 1860, when we were still slaves, we had about 0.5% of the wealth in America. 160 years later, it's less than 2%. In no way is it kept up with inflation or the 13 to 14% of the population that we are. Why is that? I would ask you to answer that question. Why is that? 160 years later, with all the advances of the civil rights, the voting movement, affirmative action, integration, educational reform, et cetera, still less than 2%, and with 13, 14% of the population. When Black Americans have never had more than 1/2 of 1% of anything of value in the richest nation on earth and suffer from a disproportionate share of social pathologies, what do Black conservatives think they're conserving? Food stamps, public housing, welfare, criminalization? Conservatives will sink a Black boat, while liberals will attempt to comfort Blacks as the boat sinks to the bottom. Conservatives will sink a Black boat, while liberals will attempt to comfort Blacks as the boat sinks to the bottom. Liberals espouse diversity and multiculturalism without understanding how these terms came about and how they are used against Black Americans. Inside of broad terms such as minority, diversity, and multicultural, Blacks are either downgraded or totally excluded. Even those leading the Black civil rights movement did not seem to understand that the political correctness of diversity caused liberals and the public in general to turn a blind eye on the unaddressed needs of Black Americans. In a society that no longer chooses to deal with race, diversity forces Blacks to compete with the fabricated minorities that liberals have added to the pot in a kumbaya effort to share their wealth with everybody. Now, here's one of the things I want you to think about, because I hadn't thought about it critically in this way. And we'll talk about it as a response to this question and 2 questions from now in question 66. Well, really question 65, the next question. What about the Black experience is different from everything else that you would call a minority or protected group? How is the experience of a Black American different in substantive ways? Not in little ways, but in substantive ways. I want you to think about that. As a Black person, things that Black people went through that no other group went through. The level of suffering, the list of suffering, et cetera, et cetera. I just want you to think about that. Once these groups are created, they are offered to both the private and public sectors as a menu from which to select for affirmative action and other preferential treatment programs. Since the American ranking order of social acceptability puts Blacks in the lowest position, government agencies and private businesses will usually choose women and ethnic immigrants over Blacks. When the menu of preferred groups and the national policy of benign neglect were first introduced in the mid-1970s, I want you to do something for me, okay? I want you to go on to Google and Google the words benign neglect, B-E-N, let me make sure I spell it right, B-E-N-I-G-N, benign neglect, and put Nixon in. It was during the Nixon administration. And read the actual memo that was written by Nixon's chief of staff to him addressing how Nixon should work with Black people. And this was back in the 70s. I want you to read that letter. I want you to read the statistics about Black people in the 70s. The 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, 2022. 50 years. You'll be surprised when you read that letter and look at what's happening with Black people today. You'll see relatively no change. And when you read that letter, it says we're doing fine. So I would just ask you to go and check that out. Benign neglect, 1970s. Okay? None of these groups needed the Emancipation Proclamation or the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment of the Constitution in order to be accepted into mainstream society. If they had needed them, they would have pursued them. Liberals and conservatives worked as a team in a manner that inflicted pain on Black Americans and compounded the injustices they had endured. By the way, 1970s liberals gave up their focus on Blacks, deciding that aligning with Blacks was probably a losing cause, but that the newly fabricated minority class could cloak themselves in the historical negative treatment endured by Blacks and pretend that they, not Black Americans, were the victims of racism. There's no constitutional, legal, or moral basis to equate the experiences of these new minorities to the unique oppression of Blacks, or to queue them up in the same benefits line. Both liberals and conservatives show their indifference to Black Americans by accepting diversity and political correctness concepts that displace Blacks. History shows that neither conservatives nor liberals can be depended upon to protect the rights of Blacks or to take action to see that Blacks are placed in a protected class based on the exceptionality of their unique historical oppression. Blacks must not only do their own political thinking, but also place their own group self-interest first and foremost. So I just want you to think about what it means to be practically be Black in America in terms of how you're treated, how you're looked upon, the opportunities that are available, what specifically either party is going to do to help Black folks and be held accountable to it. To answer your question, should we ally with liberals or conservatives? Excuse me, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I would like to have the conversation because we need a plan on how we're going to work together to make this happen, guys. Okay? Question 65. Is Black exceptionalism the unused key to Black self-empowerment? Question number 2. Blackness has had special importance and impact in America and the world. For centuries, the American public and politicians in particular have proclaimed that America's democratic values, freedoms, and immigration policies make it an exceptional nation among societies and is therefore due for special recognition, respect, and elevated status over all other nations. Exceptional means something that is different, unique, rare, unusual, and remarkable. In the case of a group, it means the members have been treated in an uncommon manner from all others. They were exceptions. What group of people in America, in nearly every respect, have been viewed and treated in a more egregious manner than Black Americans? It is time for Black Americans to demand compensation, recognition, appreciation, and respect for what their exceptionality created in America. Because of Black exceptionality, it is an affront and disrespectful for this nation and the Black overclass to continue relegating Black Americans to broad and ambiguous groupings such as minorities, poor people, people of color, diversity, disadvantaged, and multicultural. No, they Black. We're Black. Inclusion into these other categories not only denies Blacks recognition for their achievements, it gives the misleading impression that all categories of class minorities, immigrants, Native Indians, gays, transsexuals, and women were enslaved. Those other folks weren't enslaved for their being who they are, just Black people. So they're different, and the differences make a difference. Black exceptionalism is the missing factor needed to ignite a movement to change in the bottom rung status of Blacks. A fundamental premise of Powernomics, that's another book by this author. It's this book here, Powernomics, a plan for Black Americans to rally together. I'm about halfway through it. Okay, I'm in chapter 4. And I'll share one thing out of this book that really struck me. Read this. Go find this in your town or your city. What is the budget for the public education in your city? Okay. What's the budget? In Chicago, guess what the budget is? Do I have any Chicagoans out there? Any Chicagoans listening? I know we're recording this, so you're not out there listening because we're just recording it. But hey, Chicago, guess what the budget is for Chicago public schools? Guess what the budget is? It's actually published. You can look it up. It's 125 pages long, y'all. You know what the budget is? $9.5 billion. $9.5 billion. There are 322,000 students in Chicago. About 40% of them are Hispanic, and about 40% of them are Black. And about 10% of them are white. 2 or 3% are Asian, and the rest, that's 98% right there. So who controls those $10 billion, $9.5 billion, which are your tax dollars here in Chicago? Are there people that look like you and I, or people that are Hispanic or Black? No, it's the 10 percenters who don't even have skin in the game. Dr. Anderson makes a statement. Now, you tell me what you think of this statement. Black people are the only people that take their most precious commodity, their children, and they send them off to be educated by people who've for 400 years oppressed them and expect them to do a great job educating their children. Think about that for a second. You send your most precious resource, your child, to someone who historically has oppressed you. And you say, train my children with my $9.5 billion. And you do right by them now. You treat them like they was your own child. How's that working out? In this book, Powernomics, that he wrote in 1995, he predicted that by 2013, Blacks would be a permanent underclass. And that's happened. Latin people, Hispanic people have taken over as the number one minority in America. Underclass status is measured by a group standing on social discomfort indicators, such as measures of health, employment, poverty, income, wealth, education, criminalization, meaning the percentage of you that are in the criminal system, and business ownership. These data show Blacks are fixed at the bottom of every negative indicator and bear a disproportionate share of social pathologies. Why is that? We're going to pick this up. We're winding down. We got 30 seconds. I'm going to read this last statement, then we're going to pick this up. Black Americans must use their exceptionalism to change direction. They, Black Americans, have devoted nearly 500 years to run away from Blackness or being Black, that it's a negative. But they must now turn to their exceptionality, view it as a positive, and proclaim it based on the exceptional treatment and the history they have experienced in America. Anybody who's been what we through and are standing where we're standing should be, man, proud of it. It's a wonder we're still here. On that Griot Award show, there's a man named Kenan Thompson. You guys know him. He's a comic from Saturday Night Live. He made a statement. He said, I'm glad to be a Black man in America. And to be honest with you, I didn't always feel that way. I was mad at God about that. I know in the early 80s, I was working at a company downtown, what you'd consider a good job. as a very young person making close to 100 grand a year. And I would curse that God about making me black in America because of the things I was going through inside that corporate environment. Imagine being at work and one of your colleagues who went to an Ivy League school says to you, Gus, why do you keep coming to a place where nobody wants you? I said, you talking to me? Yeah. You got to know nobody wants you here. And in the midst of that kind of support or lack thereof, Black folks have accomplished what we've accomplished. So I would ask you to skip ahead. Pick these books up. A Black History Reader, that's the one we're going through right now. Black Labor, White Wealth, Powernomics, The National Plan, Dirty Little Secrets, More Dirty Little Secrets. And read these books and his research and begin to develop your own thoughts and convictions about, okay, as a Black person in America, given the way our society is, how should we respond? That's the book again, A Black History Reader, Dr. Claude Anderson. What do I suggest you do? Read this book and develop your perspective, your convictions about the questions he's putting out. He's not saying it's right, but he started through, this is his perspective. And if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. So over the next 3 months, as you kick off January, December, January, maybe February, read these 5 books. Figure out what lessons you learned. We're going to be going through it. Share your insights during our podcast, your thoughts. Take action to improve our future together, right? What are we going to do? We're going to leverage and use this time together as a way to, organize our thoughts and organize ourselves, that we can make a difference. Share this podcast and what you're learning with other people so we can have a different conversation. Okay, until next week, we're going to pick up where we left off. Okay, it's Gus Tucker at Financial Freedom Fridays here on blackdoctor.org and the blackdoctor.org network, if you will. Continue to support blackdoctor.org by clicking and liking and taking advantage of their content, and then share this with other people. Okay, you guys have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.